Hey guys, Script over here with another video, and so Josh from Den of Nerds said he heard from a source that a lot of the issues surrounding what's going on with Disney Star Wars are apparently more to do with Bob Iger than they are to do with Kathleen Kennedy. And he's feeling bad that he made fun of her or whatever, said bad things about her. I guess he got pretty intense, whatever it was last week. Said some things, there were some B's and some other swears that he was pretty mad about what's going on with Star Wars. But some of this could be true, but let's talk about it because some of it doesn't totally add up either, and I want to give my take on this, so let's get into it.
So let me now take you through a list of stuff that this very, very good source told me was stuff that Kathleen Kennedy wanted, that Bob Iger killed. Around the time that Disney buys Lucasfilm, the Clone Wars is sort of given an early exit, okay? Now, this is pretty widely known. They kill that. They keep Clone Wars, the show, canon to the Disney stuff, but they stop it.
Here's my take on this. Sometimes things do need to end, and there's a very real possibility that the executive branch of Disney said, we're not doing this. Of course, there's a very real possibility of that. And part of that could just be its resources, right? They were focused on other things. They wanted to focus on the sequels, and they didn't want to be doing a cartoon at the same time and what have you. It could also very well be that that wasn't how they wanted to pull Disney Plus in that direction. That was, maybe they didn't want the Clone Wars to be like what was spearheading when they started Disney Plus. Maybe they wanted something else. Maybe they wanted live action. It seems like that makes some sense. What are you going to do? You're going to just do Clone Wars cartoons into infinity? So, I mean, yeah, could they have continued it? Sure. Did they need to continue it? I don't know. But I don't think it's necessarily we don't like the Clone Wars, therefore we're not going to do anymore, because they did keep it canon. So I don't think it's we hate the Clone Wars. It's let's be done with this and move on because we've got other things we want to do and we don't want everyone's focus to be on this. They wanted Dave Filoni to be involved in other projects as well. And so him being tied up with doing Clone Wars might not have jived in terms of time-wise and all that other stuff. And so, yes, business decisions are going to happen. And business decisions happened when George owned Lucasfilm. I mean, that's very normal. That's what people do. So I'm not sure that this is like this big horrible thing.
Stuff with like this gigantic Kyber crystal, some flashbacks, even to Revan himself. Really wild stuff that was going to be going on.
Is that what you wanted to see Revan the first time? In canon, or in Disney canon, is in Clone Wars? I don't know. In a Clone Wars flashback? I don't know. That might have been a little anticlimactic, at least from my perspective, especially considering how popular this character is to a lot of the KOTOR fans. So it could very well be that they just said, we don't want to use this character in this context. We just don't know the exact reason why they didn't put that stuff in the giant Kyber crystal and all other stuff. It could just very well be, again, that wasn't the medium that they wanted that stuff to be put out in. We just don't know.
Well, as it turns out, it was Bob Iger that killed that. And what I was told by the source was that basically Bob Iger didn't want to have anything to do with the prequels.
As we go through this, there's going to be a large insinuation that Bob Iger was against the prequels and didn't like the prequels and, didn't want Disney to have anything to do with the prequels. But the problem with that is the Acolyte. Like, if he had the ability to just kibosh projects at will, which technically he would, the board would, he would, why did the Acolyte get made? That ties directly to the prequels. So, if he didn't want to have anything to do with the prequels, why did he allow that show to get made? See, that's a little bit wonky logic for me.
Okay, there's this weird line where Iger says something like, George was mad, but he didn't understand the pressure we were under to deliver something that felt quintessentially Star Wars to the fans. And if you read between the lines there, what Iger's really saying is that George didn't always make stuff for the fans.
Well, I think Iger probably saw the prequels and some of the negativity towards the prequels and thought, well, we want to avoid that. But again, if that's the case, how did the Acolyte get made? It just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. And if it's true that he saw the prequels as problematic, because there were fans that were displeased That's a fact. We cannot deny that. I could see a CEO of a company saying, well, we should probably avoid, doing too much prequel stuff just because, a lot of people didn't really like it. And it could just be his own personal taste that he wanted to do something more OT style. I don't see that there's anything necessarily wrong with that. Now, ultimately, what we got sucked. It didn't feel OT. It kind of looked OT and stuff like that, but it didn't feel OT as far as the characters were concerned at all. And that was the driving force of the original trilogy, was the characters. That, the setting and the space and the special effects, all those things are amazing, don't get me wrong. But the characters and their relationships and the way they interacted and just the wonderful arguments and discussions and adventures they had together was what really made Star Wars a thing. So if that was his focus, he is, missing the forest through the trees. But again, I can see how he might feel like the style of the prequels and the way they were received wasn't necessarily the best. So let's try and do something that more reflects the OT. Now, of course, they failed in that completely because they missed the fact that the characters were the most important thing, not the look of it and all that stuff. But that's a personal choice that I don't think necessarily was bad. If they had made the sequels that were very relatable to the OT on those terms, like if Luke, Han, and Leia had a couple scenes together and they were themselves and they weren't these weirdos that were nothing like themselves and Han wasn't smuggling again, all those other things, I think people would have really loved that. So I don't think it's necessarily bad per se, but I can see why Clone Wars fans wouldn't be happy with this, and people that really love the prequels wouldn't be happy with that. But that would make more sense if the sequel trilogy didn't suck so bad, right?
What's important to know now is that what my source is telling me is that Kathy was fighting for Dave's show to continue. She wanted to just continue Clone Wars. Bob Iger said no because he didn't want to glorify George Lucas' Star Wars. He didn't want to glorify the prequel era stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if he didn't want to, I guess he didn't want to. They have put out the anniversaries. They've re-released stuff. So I guess, yeah, I guess it's possible. But again, with the Acolyte and stuff, I'm kind of confused. But there's more to this also that doesn't make sense. And we'll get into that because there's a big detail that in this video Josh misses or forgets that kind of flies in the face of a lot of this stuff, and it has to do with George Lucas.
Report from my source that Kathy is the one that fought really hard to bring the Clone Wars back. Again, Bob Iger did not want to do this.
Okay, fair enough. Sure. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. And ultimately, they did let them do another season. So it's not as if Bob Iger is like this demon guy that's saying no to everything. He did allow them to do it reluctantly, but he did allow them to do it.
Kathy is the one that fights tooth and nail to get that greenlit. And eventually they get it greenlit. But here's what's really interesting. Apparently, Filoni wanted to cover the Son of Dathomir story from the Dark Horse comic books, the stuff that had like Towson, Grievous, I believe it has Dooku, and it's Maul. Very interesting little story that's technically considered canon, but it's in a Dark Horse comic book. Dave was going to adapt that in the newest season of Clone Wars when it came back, and it was going to be 16 episodes. Bob Iger said no. Bob Iger said, you have 12 episodes, and that's why we got the Clone Wars the way that it was.
Well, so if the only argument here is that he just didn't let him do 4 more episodes about this one particular story arc that was already in a comic book, that just sounds like, hey man, this is the resources we have. We don't have the resources for you to do those 4 episodes, and they're already in a comic, so we're not going to waste money on that. That's what it sounds like to me. That's just a regular corporate decision. Again, they still did the show, so I don't know what the big problem is. And he does in this video as well suggest that like the last season felt jammed together, or like there was a lot thrown in because he didn't have those 4 episodes. But if those 4 episodes were taken up by this other story anyway, then that other stuff would have still been in the same situation. Does that make sense? So I don't know. The whole thing just seems a little sus to me.
All of the scripts for season 4 of The Mandalorian and Grogu were done. Jon Favreau wanted to just do his 4th season, but Bob Iger mandates and basically made it happen that now we're going to get this Mando and Grogu movie.
Okay, fair enough, but they're still doing it, right? Favreau's still doing the show. He's doing the 4th season. He's just doing it in movie form. And again, I think that's just them, number one, trying to revive the movies and getting people out to the theater rather, instead of just having everything on Disney Plus. And also it's I think an attempt to revive the Mandalorian season or series because of what happened in season 3 and that it wasn't well received. So, yeah, I mean, okay, whatever. But either way, he's still letting John make it. I think it's stupid. I think it's a stupid decision. I think they should move on from Grogu and all this other stuff. But he's letting him do it. And he's letting him do it in movie form, which is a huge deal. So I don't think John's upset about that. I mean, why would he be? He's still doing what he wanted to do. He's just getting a bigger budget and putting it on the big screen rather than on Disney Plus. I don't know why anyone would really care. It's not like Iger's like, no, you're not doing it. Which if I was running Lucasfilm, it would have been over. In fact, Grogu would have stayed with Luke. So Mandalorian season 3 would have been a bounty hunting show again, not Adventures in Babysitting and whatever else Mandalore take a bath to recompense for your taking your helmet
Also
off
worth noting,
stuff.
the 4th season of Mandalorian was going to redeem Boba Fett. They knew they messed that up, and they were going to redeem Boba Fett, make him badass again. Something cool, something they were all down with. Even Kathy was down, and Iger killed it.
Okay, that's fair, but why was he turned into a loser in the first place? Whose decision was that, right? So maybe Bob Iger was like, you know what, you guys already screwed up this character so bad, I'm not going to give you a green light to try and fix your stupid mistake. We're just going to move on. And honestly, I wouldn't even blame him for that, would you? Like, they wrecked Boba Fett. You can't, again, this is the same thing with everything they're doing. You can't change the character into something completely different and then switch him back to what he was before. It's the same thing with what they did with the sequels. You can't have Han and Leia get to a certain point in their relationship in the original trilogy, Han especially, major character growth, or Luke where he was at the end of Jedi, and then completely flip the script, and all the lessons they learned they've completely forgot, and they're right back, not even just right back to where they were before, they're actually worse, and everything that came before and all the character development is just thrown away, and they're these completely different people that have no connection to their original characters and character growth. So doing that with Boba Fett I don't think redeems anything. I think maybe for a casual, they might be like, oh, cool, Boba Fett's back. But for those of us who are, like, paying close attention, it's like, wait a minute. So he went from cool bounty hunter to this sort of weakling guy trying to become mayor of a town, basically. And then now he's back to being cool bounty hunter. How did that happen? How does that work? Do you know what I'm saying? It's just kind of a decision I could see myself making. Like, yeah, no, we're done now. You screwed up Boba Fett, lie in your bed. You did this.
Basically, Kathleen Kennedy reportedly wanted Luke and Rey together to be the primary focus of the new trilogy. And that was something that was really important to her. But this idea was gone away from basically for 2 reasons. Number one, because Iger really, again, did not want to glorify all of the George Lucas stuff. It really does seem like Iger wanted to establish new Disney Star Wars stuff and kind of be like, thanks, George, but we can take it from here and we can make it for the fans again and get the fans excited, unlike your prequels, right? That's like the undertones that I'm picking up in the information that I'm getting. So therefore, Rian Johnson has this crazy-ass idea to like subvert all of our expectations, and Bob Iger is the voice in that room that's saying, let's go with that. I actually like that.
Well, it wasn't just Bob Iger, though. We know from the making of The Last Jedi and some of these other quotes and different things like that, that their main idea when they moved into The Last Jedi and they knew Luke was going to be in it was that they couldn't have him be heroic because they wanted more attention to be on Rey and more attention to be on Leia and the female characters. That was their big thing. And the idea that Kathleen Kennedy wasn't thinking that way, right? Like, and again, there's nothing wrong with moving on to a female lead or whatever, but you don't have to do it by killing and ruining Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and all the male characters. That's not a requirement to move on, but that's the way that they thought. And Filoni was on board with that. Kennedy was on board with that. Force is female, all that stuff. So this idea that they were sitting there discussing these things and agreeing with this, and that it's all because Bob Iger wanted, to move on from the OT characters, I don't buy that. I think he wanted to move on from them, but the way they moved on from them was decided upon by the story group, by Rian Johnson, by Kathleen Kennedy, by Filoni as a, he was consulted for sure. It's there in writing. So I don't understand why this would be an Iger thing. This is, yes, move on from, we want to transition from the OT to the new stuff and hype the new stuff. Of course that's what you're going to do. These people are getting old. Like, Harrison Ford's in his 80s. Like, you have to move on at some point. It's the way that they did it was piss poor. And again, all of them were in on that. The idea that it was just Bob Iger, standing around telling everybody what to do. Bob Iger has a lot to do. He's entrusting these people. Like, this idea that he's just so heavily involved. He's making corporate decisions, absolutely. But he's not sitting there coming up with ideas for stories and stuff like that.
My understanding and the understanding of my source is that Kathy wanted Luke to be a really important part of all of this, which, I mean, kind of makes sense. Look at what they do in the first film. You know what I mean? It's all building towards Luke. And then Ryan goes this different, crazy way. And it's just like, I think we need to reinvestigate what actually happened around that time period. It's just not as simple as like, Kathy was like, fuck Luke Skywalker, kill him. You know what I mean? That's not what happened. In fact, my source told me that Iger himself was pushing for the deaths of legacy characters, including all of the Skywalkers, because number one, it would be a really like shocking, crazy shock value thing, but also because it's the way to say goodbye to all of George's stuff and welcome in all the new Disney stuff.
Again, they all agreed to do what they did with Luke. Okay, and this is an interpretation thing too, because maybe in Kathy's mind, the way they did Luke did make Luke important because Luke's job was to elevate Rey, right? Because Rey brought Luke back into the fold. Rey's the one who convinced him that the Jedi weren't bad. Rey was the one who, Rey was the. So that still makes Luke a big part of the story. He just sucks. But he's still a huge part of the story because he's used in a huge way to make Rey bigger and better than she ever was before that film started, right? If you can bring Luke Skywalker back to the Jedi and the Force, oh my gosh, you're just the most incredible ever. And as if that was Bob Iger that said that's exactly how I want this all to go down. Make Luke a bum, and I could see him wanting him to die. That's a fair thing, of course. I think that's part of moving on. And again, I had no problem with any of them dying. It's the way they did it that sucked. Make them go out champions, not losers. And Harrison Ford definitely wanted Han to die. He'd been talking about it since Empire. So it's not just Bob Iger. It's a bunch of different people that wanted this. Again, there's nothing wrong with moving on and having these characters die. It just has to be done in the right way. And even the original plan for Kylo was that he was going to die as a villain. Like, Rey was going to defeat him. It wasn't going to be him kissy stuff and everything. That was a rewrite. And I'm pretty sure it was a reshoot, if I had to guess. That was the stuff they went back and redid. Because, again, he was supposed to get more and more evil as the trilogy went on. Then Ryan came in and changed that and made him a simp. And then JJ went back to that. Right? So he's kind of back and forth in Force Awakens. He was supposed to get more evil in Last Jedi and then just become totally crazy evil and not redeem. Like the opposite of Vader. That's what Adam Driver says on the Rick Eisen show. That was the original plan. And then they went back and changed it and added the love story and the dyad and all that stuff. Whose idea was that? To change that. So, again, I see nothing wrong with the decision being made to move on from the characters. It's just how it was done. And the how it was done part is more a responsibility of Kathleen Kennedy's than Bob Iger's. He doesn't have time to just be constantly going over all this stuff. There's tons of movies being made, tons of shows, theme parks, everything else. It's not like he's just sitting around contemplating Star Wars stories all day. He's making corporate executive decisions, which one was, yes, let's move on. And then Rian Johnson decided to move on in an absolutely horrible way. JJ did as well in The Force Awakens. And then it just became a complete mess, and The Rise of Skywalker is just terrible. So you can't take all the responsibility off of Kathy and the story group and all the people involved and just throw it at Iger's feet for making sort of a general, this is what I'd like to see happen, and then they wrote it the way they wrote it and did it in a poor way. I don't think that's necessarily can be thrown at him. Is it possible that he came up with all these ideas? Maybe, but I highly doubt it. They had a whole team of people involved in writing these movies.
Isn't it actually more believable that the person George Lucas handpicked did want to continue the legacy of him, that instead the corporate controlling entity might be incentivized to go away from the original creator stuff to solidify their own version as the new thing.
Well, they kind of have to, Josh. They kind of have to. They bought it for $4 billion. They're trying to put their stamp on it. That's a very normal thing to do, is to try and move on from what was done before so that you can bring in a new generation, new characters, right? New generation of fans. That's pretty base level, simple thinking. I don't think that that's a crazy concept. And sure, it would benefit the corporate side if done right. They had an opportunity to do everything they wanted to do. Move on, give the OT characters a great send-off, move on to the new ones, do a great job. They just didn't. They did a terrible job. Their ideas of how to do that sucked. That's just what happened. And again, all those people are responsible. Kathy's definitely responsible.
Here's a couple other things that'll blow your mind. I have heard that there was a Bane series. There was going to be a streaming service or a Disney Plus series that was going to involve Darth Bane. Bob Iger said it was too weird, too fringe. No.
You know what? That's fair. He might have thought, not enough people are going to be that into that, and we aren't sure we want to do that. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, does that make him the demon guy? Or that he's the only problem over there? No, I don't think so. And the thing, too, is with all these projects is that's a lot of stuff. I always said from the beginning they were stretched way too thin, and that's why a lot of this stuff was terrible. They had so many things going on at the same time. When George was making those movies, that was what he was doing. Everybody was focused on the films. They had gaps, years in between working on stuff. But with Disney, it's we got a movie over here, we got 2 shows in production over here, we got an animated show in production over here, we got 50 million things over here. Like it was just too much. And when you do that, it gets completely convoluted. And then you start breaking lore, and then you start having contradictions and issues. So, I mean, saying no to a project, that would have been cool to see, but at the same time, it's like, they should have said no to more projects and focused more attention on making what they were doing better rather than stretching themselves out.
Kathleen Kennedy wanted to do Old Republic. She wanted to do an Old Republic trilogy. Now, this is kind of already on the record because she was, of course, cooking the stuff with Dan and Dave, the Game of Thrones people, but from what I understand, she wanted to continue doing that even without Dan and Dave, and it was Bob Iger that said no, which is so weird because it means Bob Iger said no to, like, Game of Thrones Star Wars.
So wait, so on the one hand, you're saying that he wanted to move away from George's stuff and focus on other stuff, but then you're saying he's putting the kibosh on stuff that focuses on other stuff and away from George's stuff. You see what I'm saying? It's like, I don't know. And like, how many trilogies are you going to announce? Right? There's the Rian Johnson trilogy. There's this trilogy. There's who's the guy working on apparently another trilogy right now? Not Levy, he's doing the Star Killer, but the other guy. Like, how many trilogies are you going to have? How much time and energy can you put into these projects? That's a lot of projects. And she's constantly announcing stuff. Slow down. Like, maybe that was the big part of it, where he was just like, no, Kathy, we need to slow down. Especially after the sequels, it just became a mess. Then they had success with Mandalorian on Disney+. And then they just made tons of shows, right? Because that was where the money was. And listen, he's very involved with that. These decisions he's making are terrible. The stuff that he is allowing has been pretty terrible. I'm not letting him off the hook. But you can't let any of them off the hook. The idea that they're all just innocent little doves and Iger's this horrible guy screaming at them and making them write these crappy shows and do these crappy stories, I don't think that is the case. And again, the Acolyte contradicts the whole concept that he was against the prequels and wanted nothing to do with them. He allowed that show to be made, and that show was horrible.
According to my source, Kathleen Kennedy really wanted to use George Lucas's treatments. Now, this is very famous. This is in Bob Iger's novel, which, again, think about why he would even write about it. He would write about it to control the narrative, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one, right, guys? Because it's like, what George wanted to do was go heavy into the midichlorians and all that stuff. He wanted to It was going to revolve around the microbiotic world and spiritual beings known as the Wills. So I'm not even saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but that's what he was doing. And it's like, is that what you wanted him to do? Does that sound good to you? Focusing on that stuff? It could have been, but George himself said that his sequel trilogy would have been divisive. And he believed that many fans would have disliked it. He said that. So this idea that George was doing everything for the fans either is also not true. He was doing what he was doing and take it or leave it. He's actually said stuff like that multiple times. So this idea that Bob Iger bad because he didn't want to do what George wanted to do, but George was doing what he was doing whether or not he thought it was divisive or not, is kind of doesn't jive either, right? Like, they paid $4 billion for it. You sold it. And they were like, Iger was like, I don't want to do a story about the Wills and the microbiotic world and spiritual beings known as the Wills. I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on something else. Now, it turned out to suck, but when you sell it, they're not obligated to use your stuff. Unless you put it in the contract, which they didn't. It was just sort of like a verbal agreement, but it wasn't a legal issue to put it in there. So let me know in the comment section, would you have wanted that to be all about the microbiotic world and midichlorians and all that stuff? Like I could see why Bob Iger would be hesitant to make those stories. I can. And moving on from the OT characters and trying to start something fresh and new, and then the main focus is the Wills and stuff like that, I could see where he would be hesitant. Would it have probably have been better than the sequels we got? Well, yeah, but that's not saying much. So, I mean, yeah, okay, that sucks. And Bob Iger is douche, but that's the way it is. And the other side of this is what I was getting at earlier. Guys, Josh is forgetting. George Lucas voted to keep Iger in there. If he was so angry and so upset that Bob Iger's the reason why all the stuff he wanted to do didn't get done, when they were contested last April, why did George vote to keep him in? Not just him, all of them. He voted to keep them all in. The entire board. You tell me. Explain it to me. If Bob Iger's this guy going around ruining all these projects, and he's the one that wrecked or blocked all these things that everybody wanted to do, and he's this horrible guy, and these were all things George wanted, and Kathy's trying to do what George wanted, and Iger's blocking it all, then why did he vote to keep Iger in? That doesn't make sense. See what I'm saying? That's why a lot of this stuff seems I think there's way more to it than this. I don't think it's as cut and dry as this.
It's very well documented. Bob Iger talks about it in his book that George Lucas had treatments for his sequels. And Disney buys Star Wars, but they also buy the treatments. And Iger himself says in his own book that he knows George thought of that as a tacit agreement.
Yeah, I mean, sure. If we're going to say that Bob Iger kind of duped George in that sense, sure. But I did a video a couple days ago, talking about how there were multiple reasons why George wanted to sell. And he was 70. He didn't know if he'd live till he'd be 80. He said he wanted to do his own films and do his own thing. And, in his 70s, it would take 10 years to do a proper sequel trilogy. He said he wanted to spend more time with his family. There were various reasons why he sold. So ultimately, he decided that he wasn't going to do it anymore. And he gave it to other people. And they decided they weren't going to do the midichlorians thing. And again, if George was that adamant about it, he wouldn't have voted him back in. He obviously wasn't that adamant about that. Everyone's making this huge deal about it. Then why did he vote him back in? Why did he do that? You tell me, explain it to me. Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, please, in the comment section.
What my source is literally telling me is that Kathy wanted to use George's stuff. And in fact, there was so much fighting over this that from that moment on, there's a soured relationship between Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger. From that moment on, Iger took a kind of, honestly, he basically said, I'm going to now step in all your shit, is kind of the impression that I got.
Then why is she still there? If they've had this big falling out and they're not friends anymore and he's sticking his nose in everything and causing all these problems, why didn't he just fire her? Again, explain it to me like I'm 5. Why didn't he fire her? Is there something in the contract that said he can't? George isn't going to allow him to? Like George put it in there that they can't? I doubt it. I'd be shocked if that was the case. Yeah, we're going to pay $4 billion, but we're going to let you decide who's running our company. Come on. Think with your brain. She'd have been fired if they had this huge falling out. This sounds pretty sensational to me, and it just sounds like we're trying to shift gears now from blaming Kathy to blaming Bob, when I think it's everybody. They're all to blame. They are. They're all to blame. You can't just say it's one guy who's dealing with a myriad of different companies and issues. Like, come on. Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Think about the dysfunction of Lucasfilm for the past 5 to 8 years. Think about how much of that gets laid at Kathleen Kennedy's feet.
Well, that's her job. And if Kathleen Kennedy was not happy or wasn't getting her way, or if she was tired of taking the blame for everything and wanted to make sure that her legacy was held intact and that it was all Bob Iger's fault, she would quit and write a memoir, wouldn't she? If that was the issue, why is she still there? Again, why is she still there? If it's so awful, what are you doing it for then? If you have no control and Bob Iger's just there constantly stopping you from doing what you want to do, why are you still there? You could get a job elsewhere in Hollywood, I'm sure. You're a very famous producer. Everybody knows who you are. Why are you still there? That doesn't make any sense, right? This is all kind of suspect to me.
And guys, I'm going to go as far as to say that there could have been things going on where Disney was putting information out to make it seem more like it was Kathleen Kennedy's fault. Okay, now that gets into almost like some tinfoil shit.
Well, I mean, I don't think they need to put anything out. Are you trying to say, Josh, that in the past when you've criticized Kathleen Kennedy, it wasn't your fault? It was because they were putting out propaganda that you fell for? Is that what we're saying? I don't think that makes any sense. And the thing is yeah, you do have to kind of lay in it. Like, you guys that, like, praised Filoni and praised all these guys, and then you realize, oh no, this is super disappointing. What are they doing? And then you kind of have to backtrack. And it's like, just be straight up. It's all good, man. It's okay. You don't have to now try and, like, deflect all that onto Bob Iger now because you think that you shouldn't have said those things or something like that. I don't know, man. I wouldn't take this stuff at direct face value. I'm not saying that it's all wrong or all right or anything. I'm saying it's probably somewhere in between. And the reality of it is, if she was treated so poorly and had no control over anything, she would have quit. And if Bob Iger hated the prequels, he never would have made The Acolyte, never would have allowed it. And if the sequels were any good, none of this would have happened. And those writers and those people and the people that are in the story groups and in all those meetings, they're all to blame. Rian Johnson's to blame. JJ's to blame. The idea that Bob Iger is just overlording to the point where, you know, what is he write? Is he writing the scripts too? Like, what? Like, at what point do we draw a line in the sand and say that, well, no, Kathleen Kennedy is responsible ultimately. And if she doesn't want to be responsible, she can quit anytime she wants. No one is forcing her to be there. And she's not. And she's been there for years. She's been there for 13 years. Are we really supposed to believe that the 13 years of being there has been this horrible and she hasn't been able to do anything she wanted and it's all because of Bob Iger and yet she stays there? You see what I mean? Like, logically, that doesn't really make any sense. Actions speak louder than words. And like I said, same thing with George. He voted Iger back in. That's an action he took. Actions speak louder than words. Right? So, let me know in the comment section. Would you have wanted to see any of this stuff made? Do you agree with me that maybe a lot of those decisions were just being made by Bob because it's too much? There's too much content, too much going on, stretched too thin. Maybe he saw that and was like, Kathy, you got too much going on. I can't greenlight any more stuff for you. I actually have to pull back, right? Because she just kept announcing stuff and then it would get pulled back. Some of that stuff also involved conflicts between her, like her and Patty Jenkins. There's huge rumors that Kathy just would not approve of her script. The same thing has happened with other writers, you know, with the Obaid Chinoy movie. The Rey movie, they've gone through 3 or 4 sets of writers. Apparently there's talk that they would hand in their scripts to Kathy and they would come back with so many notes they had to completely rewrite it, and so they would just walk. The same thing happened with the Lando series. They fired the writer, took all of his scripts, and now they're apparently trying to develop a Lando movie with Danny Glover writing it, with all these guys' scripts that he wrote that they're going to use now, or use portions of if they feel like it. So it's not as if she was running this super tight, organized ship and treating everybody wonderful either. So let's not get carried away here. And if she really wanted to honor George Lucas's vision, and this is the key to all of this, if you stayed till this point, why would she stay there when they're supposedly doing things that he hates and it isn't part of his vision? Maybe it's because that actually wasn't really her priority. Because if she loved him that much, and Bob Iger was preventing her from honoring George and doing his sequels and doing all these things that this guy is saying, this source of his is saying, why would she dishonor him by staying there? Does that make any sense to you? So George says, I want you to hire Kathy. Bob says, well, heck yeah. I mean, she's, done tons of movies. She's been a huge producer for years. Yeah, bring her on. No problem. And then she goes, Bob, please do these. We got to do George's sequels, mini-chlorians and wills, and we got to do this. Actually, Kathy, we're going to go in a different direction. I don't want to do George's stuff. Oh, well then I don't want to be involved with this. Okay. Right? If that was really her motivation, why did she stay there? If she knew that Bob Iger didn't like the prequels and didn't want anything to do with the prequels, like this source is saying, why did she stay there? If her whole thing is honoring George. You see what I'm saying? This whole thing, there's just a whole bunch of people. I think there's a whole bunch of crappy people, and there's a whole bunch of incompetent people, and there's a whole bunch of people that thought they could take Star Wars and do what they wanted with it, and they were going to do something better than George. I think Bob Iger falls into that category. I think Rian Johnson falls into that. Kathy falls into that. Filoni falls into that. I think the Story Group and Pablo Hidalgo fall into that. I think it's a whole bunch of people that took what somebody else did, and they thought they could do it better, and they wanted to do it their way, which, if you paid $4 billion for it, you kind of have the right to do. That's just the way it is. And so this idea that it's all Kathy or all Bob, they're all bad. And we know that because Star Wars is a pretty much destroyed brand. That's the bottom line. So let me know in the comment section what you think. If you like this content, please like, subscribe. Always helps the channel. Feel free to check everything else on my channel. Have yourselves a really good day.